Viewer at home, we meet once again. I'm Miss Matsebula for the science. Today's topic is on organisms in their natural environment. We are looking at this. We have seen that living things, they need to survive because they have a lot of things that we bear in mind. Organism in their natural environment, this, when we look at many things around us, we see living things or the organisms. These organisms, they need each other for survival. Their survival also depends on the health of their surroundings or the environment. Biologists study the relationship between the living things. This study is called ecology. How organisms live on Earth depends on three features. They include the air. They include water and food. Briefly, let us look at this. The air, the water, and food as features of the things that we do need or depend on in order to survive in an environment. Here we have the air. Air is a mixture of gases. We find air in the atmosphere. It is a mixture. These gases include oxygen and other gases which we say are the inert gases. From these gases, we normally consider the two, oxygen and carbon dioxide. Oxygen is a crucial element for life. Respiration in the process is one of the processes we have said is needed. In fact, we are talking of the characteristic of living thing when you mention respiration. It is one feature that must be there. It must happen because of the presence of oxygen. Whether it's a plant or an animal, they all do respire. So oxygen is very essential for living things to survive. Also, we have carbon dioxide. We people or any animal will, after respiration, will be able to release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. When this happens, the plants then will make use of the carbon dioxide to make food for themselves. Hence, we talk of mainly the oxygen and carbon dioxide when we are talking of the life support and the supply of food which is made by plants. The water vapor and the other gases, we don't normally use them. We exhale, for instance, we animals, we exhale this water vapor, or it is released when we sweat or when we urinate. And then these gases too, if we don't have oxygen, the life may be destroyed because that individual organism may suffocate in case there is no oxygen. So when we talk of air, mainly what we need from the air are these two gases. Not that we don't need the others, but for the life support, we normally need the oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, looking at water. Water is another feature which is important for the life. Water is so important in life, especially for the transporting of nutrients and also the waste materials in the body. So it is in animals, it is making most of the body composition. That is about 70% of the body composition is water. And in the blood, if we talk of the human beings, it is more of the needed content in the blood for the transportation of the nutrients and also the waste material. We are saying it is about 70% in the body, and is also important for transportation, transporting the nutrients or transporting nutrients and waste. So it is very important that we have water. The transportation of nutrients in animals, we are saying it is transported after the digestion to the whole of the body or the body parts. Once it has been the nutrients have been absorbed into the blood, then they are sent to the whole body, and this is needed for a lot of processes that occur in the body, especially respiration. Again, the plants, for them to feed, they need to draw water and nutrients from the soil. There again, we see that the nutrient will reach the leaves after they have been transported. So transportation mode is that of the use of the water. Again, the starch which is made by the leaves during photosynthesis must also be transmitted to the whole organism from where it has been manufactured. So we can see then that water is very important in the body of a living organism. As human beings, we also use water in our everyday life. For instance, in cleaning or cooking. For cleaning, for cooking, and also we use water for irrigation or watering our gardens. Watering our gardens or irrigation in case of farming. This is also an indication that water is really important in our everyday life. We have to bath before we go out, so we need what? Water. The water is so important like the air, where we have said mostly it's oxygen and carbon dioxide where we concentrate on. Now, besides this, we have said we also need food. Food is needed for us to survive. You will remember that we are classified under animals. Animals, for them to get food, they need plants. And also, they need the other animals. We need plants and animals in order to get food. So now, when we talk of food, we have said we need oxygen for respiration. The food that we are talking about, which we get mainly from plants, mainly, I will repeat, mainly, we use in the body for many processes. And we need the food for energy, to keep healthy, and also to build body tissues or worn out tissues. So it builds our body. Mostly, the animals get this energy-giving food from the starchy food. Energy, we get it from the starchy food. From the starchy food which is coming from plants and nowhere else, strictly from plants. But then for proteins, the body building. For proteins, we need animals. We need animals and also some plants, which mainly are the legumes. The legumes. And now for the healthy part, now we need to prevent diseases. So we need also the nutrients where we will be getting mineral salts. Both animals and plants will provide us with this, the mineral salts and the vitamins. So the body needs to grow, the body needs to be functioning, the body needs to be healthy. Where does it get all this help? From the food that we eat. From these three main features which are necessary for life here on planet Earth, we then have what comes out as a energy flow, which is showing us that we have food that is manufacturing energy from where? From somewhere, the source of energy. So now let us look at the energy and food. We are talking of the energy and food now. We have said that we need food, we need air, we need water. Now there must be a link, because we have said that for us to survive, we need each other. So when we talk of the energy flow, it means we are talking of the energy we need in order to do many activities, which we get from food. So from here, we can see that we as animals, we cannot make our own food. Instead, we get energy from the food that we have said we eat, from the food that we eat, which ultimately get energy from the sun. These animals and plants that we eat will help us to get energy, be protected from diseases, and also help us to have body being built. So, animals get their energy indirectly from the sun. They do this by they eat the plants that have captured the sun's energy. This happens during photosynthesis. You will recall that photosynthesis simply means plants make food by using carbon dioxide and water in the presence of the sunlight and the presence of chlorophyll. So we get the starch after the plant has manufactured it, and when we eat the plants, we are getting this energy indirectly from the plants. Or we are also able to get energy by eating other animals that have fed on plants, which means now we are referring to a certain kind of animals. They are getting the energy not eating the plants, but by eating other animals. These animals, they are eaten after they have been fed, or they have fed themselves on plants. This then shows the flow of energy in an ecosystem. This shows that there is a link to the way that organisms get their food. There is a link. This is also called a food chain. This link, where food is obtained by eating each organism, also called a food chain. A food chain is defined as a simple relationship between living organisms in a given habitat through which energy is passed from one organism to the other. What is important here is that in a food chain, there is always what? Transfer of energy from one living organism to the other. It happens during feeding. The energy is transferred from one organism to another. In ecology, when we study the life, we classify these living things according to which feed on what. Then we are saying we have what we call the food chain. Let us look at one example of a food chain. This is showing a flow. The energy is coming from the sun to where? It is transferred to the vegetation, the green plants that are making food which is making starch. The nutrients which come from these plants, we are saying these are called the carbohydrates. The carbohydrates that give us starch. From there, this food in plants is then eaten by those animals which feed on the vegetation, including these ones we have in this example. Here we have an example of an organism that feeds on the vegetation. This arrow is wrongly placed because we are showing a flow. It is moving from the sun to the plants. Then this goes to, it shows which is eating which. Then the grass is eaten by, an example here, a deer. The deer is an example of an animal that feeds on herbs, hence the term herbivore. It is also called a primary consumer. Then the herbivore is an animal which feeds on the vegetation. And the vegetation now, we have said it provides us with the starch or carbohydrates. Unfortunately, the lion, on the other hand, cannot directly feed on the grass. Instead, it feeds on the herbivore, the animal that feeds on the grass, for instance here. Hence, now we have another link. And this link now is of the carnivores. Carnivores are those animals which feed on other animals, or they simply eat flesh. And these are the secondary consumers. They are the secondary consumers. Secondary consumers simply eat flesh. And the primary consumers eat what we call the herbs, which is simply plants. Plants get the energy directly from the sun. Then this forms a food chain. If a food chain is, we're talking of food. And when we talk of food chain, we normally do not include the sun. But when we talk of the flow of energy, we start with the sun. Which means now, there is always a producer. A producer, primary, consumer, and secondary. These now form what we call a food chain. Why the link? Why do we put energy, flow, and food chain? It's because with the energy that is main source is the sun, it is the energy that is transferred from the sun to this living organism. So we are showing the link of this by using the arrows, which fits on what, which fits on what. What is it that we're talking about when we talk of these consumer and producers? Let us look at that for a short while. We have these living organisms depending on each other for food. The main groups of organisms in an ecosystem are the producers, the consumers, then the decomposers. We have seen just from the diagram we have looked at that we have grass, which is producing or making the carbohydrates, hence it is called the producers. Then we have the consumers, which are in two forms, the primary and secondary consumers. Producers are the organisms that make their own food. Obviously, here we're talking of plants. Then, these producers are organisms that make their own food from substances that they get from the environment. Which means the food is there because there has been carbon dioxide and water for photosynthesis to occur. It is where it is found in the environment. Hence, we're going back and checking that we have said air is important. What is there in air? We have said there is water vapor and also there is the carbon dioxide and oxygen. For photosynthesis, we need the two, the water vapor and the carbon dioxide. Consumers, on the other hand, are the organisms that cannot make their own food, but they get their food by eating the producers, or they eat other consumers, as in the case of the lion feeding on the deer. The deer is eating what? It's eating the vegetation. In our case, we have the grass there, in our example of the food chain. Consumer nutrition is therefore dependent on plants, directly or indirectly. What are these primary consumers and secondary consumers then? Primary consumers, we have said, they are the herbivores. What is that? The herbivores are those animals that feed mainly on plants, be it trees or grass, vegetation. They feed on vegetation. Then we have secondary consumers, where we have said there are the meat eaters, carnivores. The carnivores, they feed on flesh or they eat meat. This meat is obviously coming from other animals. Hence, we are saying other consumers, because now we are feeding on what is already there. Now, this link is more complicated than we have the simple food chain. We see this in the food webs. We see this in the food webs. So when we talk of this food, a hierarchy is formed. The ecology, a hierarchy is formed, showing us how we feed in the environment as living organism. Here we have said we have the producer, then we said we have the producer, then we have consumers. These are consumers. And from these consumers, we have a group of consumers which we have not talked about, and is the scavengers. Scavengers, which they normally feed on dead. Normally feed on dead organisms. They feed on dead organisms, but still we are talking of one organism feeding on another organism. So the hierarchy says we are having a producer. A producer is eaten by a primary consumer. Then the primary consumer is feeding the secondary consumer, forming this hierarchy or the ecological hierarchy. Now let us look at the animals in details that we are talking about here on this hierarchy. What we have just looked at can be summarized in this format. We look at the given organisms here. We have these different organisms. We check what we have just talked about. If we have in this form of inscription, we have the producers and we have primary and secondary consumers plus the scavengers here. Let us match this from what we have just learned. Let us match the organism to their descriptive or descriptions, descriptive nature we have here. We have the primary consumer. We have said what is a primary consumer? An animal that feeds on vegetation. So anything that is a vegetation on this side, we have it. This side, we have a cabbage. A cabbage is a plant. What feeds on it is going to be a primary consumer. This one, when we match, a cabbage is a primary consumer, feeds on this producer. We then have a secondary consumer. It feeds on cat as an example of a secondary consumer or herbivore, carnivore that feeds on flesh. Then a cabbage too is also a producer. Producer here is a cabbage, but the primary consumer feeds on it. So there is this link. Now we have something now that feeds on a mouse. It is called its predator, the mouse predator, such as also the cat. A cat hunts. The predator is that organism which hunts the other or gets food from the other. So now a mouse, on the other hand, is hunted by a cat. It is called the cat's prey. What the cat will hunt is its prey. And again, we can say this also proves that a cat is a carnivore, feeds on flesh. I hope that is clear. Then we have parasitic animal. It is not a herbivore nor a carnivore, but it is feeding on the animal, not eating the whole animal. Usually, these parasitic animals, they live within this organism that they feed on. Like we have the tick. In our case, we normally talk of the worms. We have seen this when we were classifying living things, the worms. So now we can see that we have almost covered everything. Then we have this vulture, which represents the scavenger. Here, this is the example of a scavenger, the vulture which feed on dead organism. This is where mostly in the game reserve, they were able to tell that there is a dead organism because of a number of vultures looming around that area. So why? They are to feed on this dead organism. So you can see that we need each other in order to survive. Snakes may be feeding on the mouse. Why? Because they need to survive. The mouse, on the other hand, eats the vegetation. They may feed on plants. Let us take a short break. Please stay put, don't move. We'll be back soon.
I get set. I get set.
We're back again. Now let us look at in details the link in these food chains we are talking about. Food chains in natural environment are many. What does this mean? This simply means that it is complicated for us to talk of food chains and be more clear. But we know that in an environment, there are more organisms in that particular area, and the way they feed is more complex. So, this simply means that one organism can belong to a number of food chains. One organism can belong to a number of food chains. So when all the food chains in an ecosystem are illustrated, they link together to form what we call a food web. A food web shows a more accurate picture of these feeding patterns in an ecosystem than an isolated food chain. In an ecosystem, the energy flows, we have said, in one direction, because this simply means supply of energy from the source, which is the sun, must be continuous for the ecosystem to be maintained. From the sun, this is the energy is from the sun, then to producer, and then the different consumers. There are factors, though, that affect the stability or decline of a community. These are the biotic and abiotic factors. But before we look at this, we will come back to this. Let us look at the example of a food web. From this, we are saying these are forming a food web. For instance, here we have one kind of producer. But this producer is eaten by 1, 2, 3 organisms, as you can see. These organisms are all feeding on this one kind of producer. This organism is grass, which is our producer. So we can see that we have a grasshopper, and we have the mouse and a rabbit, all feeding on this one kind of producer, the grass. Then the food chains are, we have a producer, then these are the primary consumer. 1, 2, 3 are the primary consumers in a food web now, because all are feeding in one organism. Yet we talk of a food chain as producer, then the primary consumer, and the secondary consumer. Sometimes we also have what we call the scavenger, which is here in our case an example of the hawk. Here, the rabbit, once it has fed itself on the grass, there comes the hawk. It is able to feed on the rabbit. Here, the arrows are more clear because they are showing the energy flow from the producer to the primary consumer, then to the secondary consumer. And then we have the scavenger here. Okay? In our case, we have grass to mouse, primary consumer, then to the snake, secondary because this one feeds on the mouse. The rabbit is the primary consumer, and then we have the hawk. In this case, because it's just feeding on the rabbit, it is the secondary consumer, but it also becomes a scavenger in this case where we have now a link which is from producer to primary consumer, secondary, then now it becomes, the hawk now becomes a scavenger. So we are shown here the link which is now more complex and a combination of many food chains which is a food web. Going back to where we have just left, we are saying there are factors that affect the stability or decline of a community. These are the biotic and abiotic factors. They are factors. They are now not living organisms, as we say. They are factors. Biotic factors are those which involve activities of these living things. These include competition, include predation, who hunts who, and then as you have said, we have a parasite, parasitism. Then we have abiotic factors. Here, we're now talking of factors that do not involve living organisms. They are naturally there. These include the rainfall, the temperature range, they talk of prevailing wind, and also the soil quality. And then these factors may have great but bad effects. Example, if the food chain may be broken, then the pyramid, which we have shown, will be affected. Example is when there is drought, there is no water, the grass, for instance, may dry out. Then what will this primary consumer feed on? That means there will be what we call the decline, a number decrease. And also if there is too much rain, then there will be more plants growing. There is more food for the primary consumers. And that means automatically there is more food for the carnivores to feed on. Okay? Then this now results in the, as I have said, if there is drought, a number of producers will be reduced or finished, resulting in hunger and then final death of the primary consumer, automatically affecting also the death of the carnivores since they have nothing to feed on. But an increase of these producers will result in increase of primary and secondary consumers, which are the herbivores and carnivores. If the food chain is broken down, the pyramid, the ecological pyramid is also affected. For example, when there is drought, we have said that the number of producers will be reduced or finished. This is more of a repetition of what I have just said. Now, we move forward to this next page. We have said in an ecosystem, what can be affected. This is summarizing what we have just looked at when we talk of the ecosystem being affected by what? The different things we have mentioned. So we have said what affects is the climate, geography, the soil composition. We also talk of the predation. All these are factors that affect the ecosystem for balance of what we find in a natural environment. Then we have also included the competition. Let's not forget that. Competition. And also there are human activities. There's farming, and the bad effect which is coming from human activities is pollution. Before we complete this, we will have also looked at pollution. Pollution. And when you talk of the predation, what exactly do we mean? Predation and grazing. Here we are talking of these organisms that feed on each other. Their number increase or decrease will have an effect where in the ecosystem of the balance in nature of what we find in that habitat or maybe an ecosystem. And then when we talk of competition, we compete for food. We also compete for space. Sometimes we compete the space. We also compete for mates. Who is involved with who? So in the soil, when you talk of other effects, as you can see, we have the soil. With the soil, we talk of how is the soil composition. Is it acidic? Does it have enough nutrients? We know that an acidic soil, in most acidic soil, most plants do not grow well. Hence, then it means there will be a decline in the number of the producers. Climatic conditions, they affect also the balance. Those may include the wind. When you talk of the wind, like now, we are already in winter season. This means the plants will grow and will be dry fast because there is no water, and instead the little water that is in the plants is drying out because of the wind, which is the weather condition, and may also be affected by how much rain we have and the temperature change. Now, even if there was no wind, because of the temperature dropping, the plants, you find that they are also affected. They are not able to grow well when they are exposed to this very harsh cold wind. Now, let's look at the next part. Then we will look at pollution and conservation. Definition of ecological terms. These terms include ecology. What is this? Ecology is defined as the study of relationships of organisms with each other, and their environment with each other. It deals with how organisms relate to others and why it is successful in a particular environment. What are we talking about? We're talking of an organism. It is able to relate with other organisms where in this particular environment. And how it survives is the way it relates with each other. So, in an environment, what is this an environment? The environment now is everything in the surrounding of an organism that could possibly influence it. Which means here we are not talking of people living in that area, but you may be talking of the people living in that area with other organisms and the factors that affect the life of those. So this relationship is studied in an ecosystem. An ecosystem is defined as the different organisms living together in a given environment, and they are depending on each other. These form a community. What is this community? A community of living things and their non-living environment, which means we're talking of also even the factors that affect the life, or we can talk of also what we need in order to survive. So the community of living things and their non-living environment that exist without any disturbance from human. This is what we call the ecosystem. An ecosystem, if the system is not disturbed and it is having only those organisms which are naturally there, then it will have an undisturbed ecosystem. Ecosystem has the living and non-living part. The earth is a combination of many ecosystems. They include the grassland. Living things survive in the grassland. The grassland is growing in the soil, and then we are saying we have an ecosystem. The grassland is part of the ecosystem. The ecosystem is also made of the ocean, the forests, the ponds, the deserts, and many others. A group of organisms that can interpret or can be able to mate or reproduce in that particular area, they are called a species. They can interpret, then they form a species. It can be maize, growing around maize. Maize cannot interbreed with cabbages, but there are different forms of the maize. As you can see, we sell or we buy many types of the maize. And then a population. What is a population? It is the total number of species that are found in a community. We have said that there must be a balance, but then there is that interference of man, which results in pollution. What is this pollution? Pollution. This is when we have the interference of human. They interfere with their activities. So interference of human activities, which will alter or change the ecosystem. Why do we change? Mainly we change because we want to farm or do forestry or want to build as human beings. But in that case, we come with many things, and when we come with these many things, they will pollute the area. And then we are saying interference of human activities which alter the ecosystem for farming, forestry, building, and all activities, which will add pollutants to this atmosphere or to the land and water, will then normally bring pollution. As you can see, these three words that I have underlined, we have pollutants that will affect the atmosphere, which means we are talking of air pollution. Then that will affect the land, which means we'll have land pollution, and then the pollutants that will be deposited in water, which will affect water, will be forming water pollution. Pollution is therefore the presence in or the introduction into an environment of a substance or thing that has harmful or poisonous effects. When I introduce something, but it has no harmful effects or is not destroying, that is not pollution. But it becomes a pollution when it becomes a destructive measure. It can take the form of chemical substances. Our pollutants can be chemicals. or energy, such as noise. Too much noise results in destruction of our eardrums. So we have now noise pollution. And we can have too much light, people destroyed because of too much light. And then the pollutants can be natural or foreign. Natural, they are there, we have not made them, but foreign, it is due to what people have done or produced. Then human activities such as the motor car exhaust in environment will result in pollution of the air when you talk of the exhaust fumes. And then we have industrial or household smoke when we burn things, industrial or at home. This smoke again may pollute the air. It means that will be the air pollution again. And may have dust from industries, which is also affecting the air. Therefore, it means we have air pollution. And then we have insecticides, which may affect the air and also the other animals. That because when we talk of insecticides, we normally take chemicals so to destroy insects that feed on our crops or vegetables. So we are destroying these animals. Then we can have fertilizers which normally destroy the soil. Hence we normally talk of better fertilizers being the natural fertilizer, which is the crawl manure, not what we make, because they have destructive measures. Then we have litter plastic and also non-rotting waste. When deposited on the land, they become a problem. They cause land pollution. Then, as we continue with this, then pollution, a balance on the ecosystem is necessary so that life is able to go on. Though we can talk of insecticides destroying this, we do need the insects. The insects need the plants to live. So there must be a balance. No community can carry on life or can survive and have organism without food or water or shelter, and this is needed so it must be accommodated. Natural phenomena such as fire, disease or diseases, and floods and other predators are there to balance our food, our territory, a space where we survive, and the water. We need all this so that there is a balance in that ecosystem. But we need to conserve or use these things with great care. Right now, it is winter. Already, the Minister of Agriculture has noticed that let us not make fire because it will be destroying the grass when we burn the grass. Then the environment is being destroyed so that we don't expose the soil, because there are no rains for the grass to grow soon just after the fire. We have to use whatever we are using with great care so that we are able to conserve our resources. The soil is our greatest asset. We need to conserve it. That is why then now we have game reserve. When we talk of conserving, some animals and plants are so useful to us, but the way we use them without conserving, we can soon run out of. Then that is becoming a problem. So that is why the governments of these different nations have game reserve. They exist so that they are able to save some of the organisms that are much exploited. For instance, these days we talk of the rhinoceros that is being hunted every day. Why? They are looking for the horns so that they have jewelry to use from this horn. They are very useful to us. Water needs to be conserved, and our Ministry of Agriculture again is talking of us conserving water by recycling. To recycle means we do recycle. We do use, but when we use, we are able to get back what we have already used. They say we can wash dishes, wash our clothes, then use that very water to water our garden by treating this water so that it is able to be used by the plants when we go and water our gardens. Therefore, it means we are not taking out the soil as more important. Though we have these three features, the soil, the water, the air, and food. But this food, once produced, it must be continuous that we have the food. So the plants must be continually fed. They are able to manufacture their own food because they do have the nutrients that they are feeding on. All in all, we can say that organisms in their natural environment are able to survive without humans' interference, which normally is a bad habit because it brings pollutants to the environment. I hope that we enjoyed ourselves today. This lesson has been of benefit. Hope to meet you next lesson. Bye-bye.